a president, a newly elected Speaker of the House, and a government shutdown. In between, 800,000 federal employees waiting to figure out who is going to blink first. In the midst of this conversation, however, while we talk about border security, while we talk about border walls, while we discuss the leverage that either side may or may not have in this fight, what seems to have been lost in the shuffle are the people who are being directly affected by this shutdown: federal contractors and federal employees. Namely, the over 800,000 federal employees who have been either furloughed, waiting at home without paychecks, or the several federal workers who have had to go to work anyways, despite not knowing when their next paycheck is going to come. To get a good idea of the effects of this shutdown, I sat down with two individuals who are directly impacted by this very shutdown: Sophia Douglas at the Department of the Treasury, and Angela Grace, a pseudonym for an individual who also serves as a federal contractor, with contracts that spanned across many departmental agencies within the federal government. I first sat down with Sophia Douglas over at the Department of the Treasury to get a good idea of how this shutdown is directly impacting her, what were the moments leading up to the shutdown like, and what's she doing to prepare if the shutdown is prolonged. Let's take a listen.
The last two shutdowns, they were very brief. So you kind of have this temporary sense of like, okay, there's a little chaos here. Where are we going with this? Okay, Chuck and Nancy, DACA, the wall, da-da-da. And you just felt like, okay, we're going to have this brief moment of insecurity. And then, 2-3 days later, they have a deal. And all was, for that moment,
Yeah.
things are okay. We can move on. But there was always this, what's the word? You're waiting with bated breath, I'll say.
Mm-hmm.
So we always knew that we were going to be lurching from crisis to crisis to crisis. And that's what makes this different.
Okay, so, and I kind of want to break this down out, and I want to get you a real picture of essentially your situation, because right now, voters and everyday Americans, I don't really feel like are paying attention as much. And I think a lot of them don't even know truly the situation that you and your colleagues are actually in right now. And so I want to talk to you. I know the White House, I believe it was about a week ago or 2 weeks ago, had released a set of template letters for federal workers who, like yourself, who were impacted by the shutdown, that essentially you could, my understanding is, send out to different companies who you might owe bills to, or like leasing agencies that, if you're a renter or a bank or whatever. And the template was essentially, from my understanding, proposing that you could perhaps work off your debts. So if you had a renting bill, if your rent came up, you could ask the leasing agency or property management, hey, can I perform some chores to work off my rent for this month, given the situation? When that was sent out, first of all, did you get those letters? And if you did, what was your reaction to when you heard about those letters?
Yes, actually, yes. I'm sorry, I'm fighting the urge to laugh, because those letters, the templates,
Mm-hmm.
we did receive those, I believe, and literally speaking, this was within hours of knowing the shutdown was imminent. So, we could see our managers scrambling around. They were waiting for emails, waiting for phone calls. We had a contingency plan being set up.
Mm-hmm.
And when we got these letters, they sent us emails and said, they were like little PDF files, attachments. And they said, oh, yes, here are possible letters you could send to your creditors. And I read the letters, and I was speaking, I'll be honest, frankly, they weren't feasible. They were not particularly helpful. Mm-hmm. Because basically, when you looked at what the content of those letters, it just showed to me a complete lack of regard or any firsthand experience of what life is like for working people. especially for federal workers, and many of whom are longtime civil servants with very modest incomes.
Mm-hmm.
That's frankly how I felt. So basically, I would say they were not particularly helpful. I will just put it that way.
Very good. Okay, understandable. And I've read stories of other federal workers of different agencies or different departments who have begun essentially searching for work, and some of them have essentially said that there's been a struggle of finding places that will hire that at least they could pay their bills with. Some places, like a McDonald's at $7.25 an hour, you might be able to snag quickly, but anything that could actually pay the bills for the time being is tough because, as I think one person said, because of the uncertainty that tomorrow, essentially, the government could be reopened, businesses aren't necessarily wanting to have to spend the money necessary to pay for your training, to pay for background checks and all these type of things if they believe that the moment they bring you on, theoretically speaking, you could be back to your day job by tomorrow.
Well, exactly, and that's why when we were given I will say our instructions
Mm-hmm.
when we knew the shutdown was coming, when we knew the shutdown was imminent, especially with the IRS, Department of Treasury, we're a little bit of a different bag just because of who we work for.
Mm-hmm.
One thing, again, you're expected to, think about it this way. Even during a furlough, during a shutdown, and we're furloughed, we are still employees of the federal government,
Mm-hmm.
which means we're still expected to follow certain rules and guidelines. And that includes, a lot of times, we're restricted to certain employment.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, in my situation, working for the government, working for the Department of Treasury, I can't say, for example, I'm not allowed to go work for a tax preparation service. That would be the quickest job you could pick up,
Mm-hmm.
just given what I've been doing now. Obviously, that's not my expertise, but that's my experience the last couple of years, so I could do that really quickly.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
But I'm not allowed to do that because it would be seen as a direct conflict of interest, and rightfully so. I understand that. So those are the kind of things that we're confronting as Department of Treasury / IRS employees.
Yeah.
So yes, that does really hamper our ability to maybe pick up a quick job, a kind of, what do you call it, kind of an interim position. It does. We're effectively, dare I say it, it is kind of a hostage situation.
Now, across social media, via Twitter or Facebook, and even sometimes Instagram, we have been able to pay close attention to members of political groups across the country, be it libertarians and Republicans and even Democrats. But what seems to have been an alarming trend among some groups is the level of glee that has risen in support of this shutdown. Not for any purpose of supporting a border wall, not for any purpose of supporting the president's policies or the Democrats' policies, but merely the joy of having a government shut down. I spoke with Sophia about that very level of glee to get her opinion on why so many people are excited or, albeit, have a lack of sympathy for people in her position. Obviously, among the president's base right now, there are a mixture of, I guess you could say, libertarians who are excited about a government shutdown in general, regardless of a wall or not. And then there are members of the president's base who essentially say that you guys knew what you were getting into. You're a federal worker. This is not the first shutdown in the history of the country. It's not even the second. We've had many throughout the course of our country's history. And that you guys have a lot of benefits, and that this is really the only downside to working for the government, and that they have no sympathy for you. What would you say to those individuals, or what message would you want or what would you want them to understand that maybe you believe they don't currently understand about your position during the shutdown and overall as a government employee and public servant?
Well, frankly, I don't even know how to respond to, frankly, I think such a cynical view and an outlook. There's just really no way to respond to something that's, like I said, I would say, frankly, cynical and irrational. There's just not a rational response to that. But, what I would say is that there's a problem with the body politic. It is damaged. And, this isn't about, well, you know what you're getting into, or this idea that, well, we've had shutdowns before. That's all well. That's true. But quite frankly, that doesn't, what's what I'm looking for? That doesn't necessarily give anybody comfort,
Yeah.
Yes, we've had shutdowns before. That's obviously anyone who's been following history at all understands that that's not the point. The point is, this is unsustainable. This is not a way to run a representative democracy. And, again, the body politic is damaged. So we need to fix some of these problems. We just need to move. We need to move forward. We need to figure out a way to, like I said, to not live crisis to crisis, be in perpetual crisis mode. Whenever there's the debt ceiling issue, there's a budget issue, people are looking to their leaders in Washington to be just that, to be leaders. And I think that's what people are looking for. And I'm sorry, federal workers, like I said, many of us, not really myself, I'm relatively new, but these are long-time civil servants. And they should not be held as political hostages. It's just not fair. It's not right. It's unjust. And there's no excuse, period.
Now, my next guest was Angela Grace, a pseudonym for a federal contractor who I sat down with to get a good idea of how herself as a federal contractor is being directly affected, how her employees that she holds are being directly affected by this shutdown, and what her plans are if this shutdown continues. Let's take a listen. How long have you been a federal contractor?
I've been involved in federal contracting for about 25 years now.
Okay, all right. So you clearly have been through a lot of government shutdowns. This is not your first rodeo.
Definitely not my first rodeo.
So how would you, if there is any difference at all, how would you compare this government shutdown perhaps to, I guess maybe Clinton was the longest lasting shutdown. Do you see any similarities between those two right now?
Well, I would say that there's more uncertainty with this government shutdown than in the past. With the Clinton shutdown, while that did last, I believe, about 21 days, close with 3 weeks or so, there wasn't much concern that a resolution would be forthcoming and that it would end. With this one, there are concerns about the length of time that this shutdown could continue. There is a possibility that this shutdown might proceed for 2 months, 3 months, 6 months. And I've never before, in the 25 years that I've been engaged in government contracting, been concerned about a shutdown continuing for that length of time.
Given the fact that you are staffing people to work in these government buildings that right now are shut down, a lot of federal employees have been sent home. Does that mean your employees are the ones that you're essentially staffing for these? Have they been sent home, or is that something in which you're paying them to still work even though the government shut down?
100% of my employees have been declared to be essential.
Okay.
And my company has been asked to allow my employees to continue working, which I have done. I have complied with that. Initially, my employees were concerned as to whether they would get paid because, of course, they're hearing that employees who are federal employees who are declared as essential are working, but they won't get paid until the shutdown is over. As an employer, because I'm not the federal government, I believe that it is my obligation to pay my employees during the shutdown, even though I myself am not getting paid by the government.
So you're not receiving payment from the government to pay your employees to do the work for the government, essentially. But you're still actually continuing to pay.
That is correct. To be fair, the shutdown began, I believe, December 21st, December 22nd. The work that I performed on my contracts in December, my invoices for that work was submitted on January 1st, January 2nd. Payment is not due until the end of January.
Okay.
So technically, the government has not missed paying me yet. But if this government shutdown proceeds through January, then I will miss my first payment.
So what does that mean for you, I guess? So if the shutdown does prolong, if it keeps going, what does that look like for you, I guess, and the people that you employ?
Well, fortunately, I currently have enough cash reserves to meet payroll through early March. If the shutdown goes beyond then my company will be faced with some difficult decisions. Getting loans, whether it be from myself personally or getting loans from a bank, or telling my employees that they have to stop working.
Let me ask this. Do you believe that some Americans may not fully understand or comprehend what this shutdown means and what the effects are?
I believe that this may be the first shutdown where Americans are getting the best education about shutdowns and what it means for federal contractors and what it actually means for federal employees. What it means for us as a whole as Americans. Shutdowns are typically avoided like the plague, it seems, when it comes to politics, both Democrats and Republicans. I don't think that shutdowns hurt the average American the way politicians would like you to think, but they do hurt those who actually work for the federal government, whether it be directly as a federal employee or as a government contractor like myself. And I think we are going to hear more stories about that. The impact, the direct impact on federal contractors and the direct impact on federal employees themselves. More so than when you hear about a national park being closed.
Absolutely.
That really doesn't have, for the most part,
The resonating effect that some people would want it to.
on Americans.
Yeah. Okay.
I thank both of my guests for sitting down with me and sharing with me and you their stories of this shutdown. No matter what your position is on policy, government shutdowns affect people, and being able to hear their stories during these moments are extremely impactful. I only hope that it gives us a greater understanding of what exactly the effects of a government shutdown truly are. I'm Garrison Douglas. This has been a Garrison Douglas Show special on Sunday. Have a good afternoon.